Colonel Jeff Chostner is a proud native of Pueblo and an East High School Hall of Fame inductee who served valiantly for 22 years in the United States Air Force as a judge advocate before retiring with the rank of colonel, as well as being a graduate of the University of Colorado, the University of Mississippi School of Law, and the Air War College. Colonel Chostner used his military experience and skills to lead the public in the home front, where he held public office as Pueblo City Council member, Pueblo City County Commissioner, and leader serving as district attorney for the 10th Judicial District. He has dedicated himself to numerous community organizations and civic initiatives across the region, embodying a lifetime of leadership, public service, and commitment to the community. This evening, we'll hear how discipline, structure, and values installed during his military career helped shape his approach to public service and civic leadership. Please join me now in warmly welcoming Colonel Jeff Chostner.
I appreciate that, Jarek. You kept that mercifully short. All too often it ends up sounding like a eulogy rather than an introduction, so I appreciate that. It's really great to be here today and see so many friends and family that we have. People that I see here today that go back to my youth, that knew my family back when, and it's really representative of Pueblo, which is whom I have always tried to represent and give as much dignity and class, intelligence and energy, and represent that to the rest of the state as I possibly can. And you folks have always helped me in that. You've been supportive of me over the years, and I want you to know how much I appreciate it and you all being here today. One of the things I'm proud of that you don't know of is an individual who's here today who will go nameless, is a graduate from Veteran Treatment Court. And one of the things I promised when I became DA was to start a Veterans Court, and to take those people that we thought were deserving of a second chance, who had given to their country and had really turned their lives around. And I won't point that individual out to you today because I don't want to embarrass him, but he's one of our star graduates here today, and I'm so proud to see that he showed up here today and joined his fellow vets as somebody who reformed himself and is a productive member of society today. So thank you for being here to all. So I asked my friend and fellow East High graduate, Troy Davenport, whether I could tell an off-color joke, and he says, yeah, I think it's okay. I asked Drew, and he said, you have to. You got to tell an off-color joke here today. So this is one I used to tell when I used to teach at the Army JAG School in Charlottesville, Virginia. But imagine three pilots, three aviators on a plane. They're being deployed from the United States to Europe. You have an Army warrant officer helicopter pilot on the left, Air Force F-15 pilot here, and a Navy F-18 pilot there. And they're going to be on a long 9-hour flight from the U.S. to Europe. And they settle in. They all kick their shoes off, lean back. About an hour into the flight, the Air Force guy says, hey, I need a Coke. Any of you guys want a Coke? They say, the Army guy says, sure, I'll take a Coke. So the Air Force guy, being the real officer and gentleman of the three, he gets up and he goes back and gets a Coke. While he's gone, the Air Force or the Army guy goes, I never liked those Air Force guys anyway. You know, the chair force, they don't do anything. They're not real warriors like we are. He leans over and he spits in the guy's left shoe. Air Force guy comes back, gives him his Coke. He sits there. They talk. Time passes. A couple hours later, says, I'm going to go get a Coke again. Anybody want some? Navy guy says, yeah, I'll get one. Air Force guy goes and he says, you know, I'm with you. These guys, they fixed base land. They've never landed on a carrier in their life. They don't know what real danger is. Leans over and spits in his right shoe. Air Force guy comes back, gives him his Coke, and he says, you know, I'm kind of getting relaxed now. And he puts his feet in his shoes and he feels the moisture in the bottom of the shoes. And he knows what's happened. He says, come on, guys. He says, we're all part of the same team. Yeah, we got different colored uniforms, but we all fight for the U.S. We're part of the same team. We are unbeatable as a team. He says, how long are these juvenile games going to go on? How long are we going to be spitting in each other's shoes and peeing in each other's Cokes? I had a multi-service audience at Charlottesville. I had to tell that to take a little heat off of me. So, I talked to Brad about what you all wanted here today, and it was kind of how military qualities had helped in my civilian profession. And I have to tell you, it was really the foundation in many ways for leadership and how to treat people, how to run an organization, and try and do it in a right, ethical way. So I had a few ideas that I jotted down for you, and then I kind of wanted to go into some more personal thoughts of things that have kind of hit me in the last couple weeks as I get a little older, and you tend to look at life a little bit differently as time goes on. One of the things I always used to preach to my JAG officers was energy. You had to make sure that your energy was up to snuff, that you got the mission done, that you couldn't be a slacker, you couldn't be a slug out there. You were helping our fighting force, and you had to be as sharp as they were within your own profession. You had to be there and be supportive of them. And in many cases, because we enforced international law, whether it was the law of The Hague or the Geneva Convention, whether it was treaties we had with other countries, whether it was domestic U.S. law, sometimes what we wanted to do to get the job done, we couldn't do. But I said, never accept, no, you can't do that, sir, as an answer. It was always, we can't do it this way, sir, but I think we can do it this way. I want to help you get where you want to go. So it was always that energy and that willingness to be aggressive and positive towards the mission to make it happen. Secondly is creativity. I think, we talk about thinking outside of the box. To me, that's just using your brains and using the natural intellect that you always have. One of the observations I made over the years, having come in right when the draft had ended, and then as we went to the all-professional Army, is I always thought that one of the values of the draft was it brought people into the service who never would have considered the military at all. But they were forced in involuntarily, and then once they got there, they said, this is a pretty good gig. I like this. It's not what I thought at all. And it brought in scientists, and it brought in engineers, and it brought in doctors, and it brought in lawyers, and it brought in a whole variety of people that would have never considered the military a career at all. And I think that's the beauty of the American military system. I still believe in the citizen soldier concept. I think we should reintroduce the draft today because we all need to have common experiences in this country. That's one thing that we all have in here. Wherever life has taken us, we always remember boot camp together. And we remember that drill sergeant that used to chew our ass all the time. We had that in common. And it also gives for sympathy and uniformity in society to his fellow Americans. That the rich kid who lived on the hill for 2 years had to spend 2 years with his brown brother from the barrios in Los Angeles and his black brothers from Chicago. And when they ever saw stuff on the news or heard things say, that's not the Joe I remember. That's not the guy I went through boot camp with, and vice versa. You had the people who said, I remember Willie, who was from San Francisco, rich guy. He was never like that. And you get that kind of shared sympathy for each other, having belonged to an organization that believed in something greater than themselves, that believed in the United States of America, our principles, our Constitution, that we all believed in the same thing together. We don't want a Prussian military. We don't want a military where an officer gives an order and the sergeant, NCO, just says, yes, sir, and carries it out. I heard an analogy once that every time a Prussian officer said, take that hill, they went and did it with whatever casualties came. I like the American example better, which when the captain says, take that hill, they say, we will, sir, but have you thought about this? Can we do it this way? They have that communication and respect for each other, and it causes less casualties, it causes less bloodshed to be had. It's a better way to do things. Just as an example, if you look at a very totalitarian style, whether it's the Germans in World War II or the Russians in World War II, the Russians lost 25 million people in World War II. And it was basically one frontal charge from Moscow to Berlin. And they lost 25 million people. Take a look at what General MacArthur did in the Pacific. He went from Australia, where he had been exiled, up through the Philippines, Okinawa Corregidor, and we lost 26,000 killed, not casualties, but killed. 25 million to 26,000 killed, I'll take the American model every time. And that's what we deserve in a democracy where you can actually talk to leadership in a respectful way, in a way that they understand, but you can talk to people to do it the right way. Loyalty. I believe in loyalty to the mission. I believe in loyalty to the person that you answer to. But loyalty is a two-way street. I expected in every organization I was in, and in my office as DA, I expected loyalty from them. But it's a two-way street because they deserve loyalty from me, whether it was in pay and working conditions, listening to their ideas. I believed in that military model when we'd sit around the table with my senior attorneys. I want to hear what you all have to say. Tell me what I'm not seeing. Tell me what I'm getting wrong. I want to know that. But once we have corporately made a decision, I do expect you all to carry it out. And I don't want any backsliding where, oh, you know, we're going to do it this way. Yeah, the boss wants to do it that way. But none of that belittling of leadership. You have to buy into it because leadership's willing to buy into you and into your intellect and how you'll be supportive. Military bearing. I always thought that you should look, walk, and talk like a professional. And whether you're in uniform in the military, you're always being watched. You are always an unofficial ambassador of the United States of America. Or whether it's in your actual duties, whether you're in court, you should look like a pro. I had a dress code in my office as district attorney. I said, because you're being paid by the public out there. And they don't pay you to be a slob. They pay you to come in coat and tie and look like a pro. I wanted to run my DA's office as if it was the largest law firm in Pueblo County, because in fact it was. We just specialized in criminal law. But I said, when those folks come in here, they are paying your billable hours. They're called taxes. And you owe those folks to dress right, look right, and perform right as a professional. I expected that as a military officers too. Whenever we had organizational lunches, my guys went in their combination ones. I didn't care what other people wanted. I wanted my office to look distinct, and I wanted them to look like they were the professionals that they were. It increases respect for your office. It increases respect for the work you do. You also need to understand your organization. I often said you need to understand the military. Of course, we all went through boot camp where they told the story of the country from a military perspective, told the story of your service through the country's history as well. I expected that when I was on active duty. I was a head JAG at Bowling Air Force Base for a couple of years. I reported to the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force, who reported to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. So the Chief of Staff turned to the head lawyer and said, General Hemingway, I need this done. Hemingway would turn to me and he'd say, Jeff, I need you to do this, because we were the arms and legs. I had 88 attorneys in Washington. Here, my entire office was 75 people. So that kind of shows you the difference in size. But they needed to understand the organization they were with, and I've done that both on the civilian side and in the military. As I was trying to say and get out, when I was stationed in Washington, I used to have and I got permission from the commander to do this. I'd say, sir, I'd like to do a little recreational thing, something for morale on Friday afternoons, once a month. And I said, I'd like to do Coke and popcorn and a movie. And he said, okay, what you got in mind? I said, I want something that tells the history of the United States Air Force and the JAG component of it. And believe it or not, there's lots of movies out there if you think about it. We did A Soldier Story. Remember that with Denzel Washington? We did Judgment at Nuremberg. We did The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell. People need to know who Billy Mitchell was. Us Air Force guys know who Billy Mitchell was. And that court martial actually took place at Bowling Air Force Base. We went down to the hangar where that court martial took place. So we did those kind of, Kane Mutiny court martial. Many of you remember that with Humphrey Bogart. So we did those kind of things, and they were all on leadership and how you inspire people and bind them to you to ultimately get the mission done. And the commander would come down with us every now and then. He'd say, where's my popcorn, Chostner? And he'd sit down there with us, and he'd watch. If he knew what the movie was, and it was one he was interested in, he'd come down and do it too. So understand your organization. I always thought that the people in the DA's office needed to know who Clarence Darrow was, who F. Lee Bailey was, who William Kunstler was. These are the, to read To Kill a Mockingbird. They needed to have respect for their profession and know what they did, and know how we fit into the greater society of things, into our community here in Pueblo. I wanted them to know that they chose a service with a higher calling than just to make money, than just to get things done. As prosecutors, you may or may not know this, I was responsible for being a hard-nosed prosecutor and going after criminals and trying to keep the streets as safe as we could. But I had another ethical responsibility to do right, to do justice, and to make sure that we weren't just prosecuting to prosecute, but to get the right resolution for the community. And I can give you examples where we did that. Self-sacrifice. I always considered the military to be like the priesthood. You're not in it for the money. You're not going to make money in the military, but you're going to be proud of yourself. You will be secure. You'll be paid fine. You'll have the benefits and all those kind of things, but you're not going to get rich doing it. You're doing it for a higher purpose. You're doing it for the country. You're doing it for the Declaration of Independence. You're doing it for the Constitution. You're doing it for the law that we're all bound to uphold, and we need to make sure that we have that. You're doing it for altruistic reasons. You're doing it because it's right, and we need that. And in this society today, and this, you can go back over American history for a long time and know that we are not always as altruistic as we can be or should be. But that's what motivates us, and that's what should motivate us, to do what's right and uphold those American ideals that go back to the founding of the Republic. I love that this is called the Center for American Values, because they are American values. It's not that the other countries don't have values of their own, but our American ones are unique, and they have been ones that we have tried to enforce over the years to show the leadership in the rest of the world. Kind of think of it this way. We are a very unique experience in the history of mankind, but the history of mankind is not very old. If you go back, the world we live in today really only began in 1800. The world in 1800 was not much different than 1700. And 1700 wasn't much different than 1600 or 1500, etc. But 1800 was different than 1900. And 1900 was different than 2000. So the world we live in is 2 and a quarter centuries. I'm 73 years old. I've lived through a third of the Industrial Revolution. And the world we have today is reflective of all those changes that have taken place. And America came in 1775. So we were there at the beginning of the industrial age. When they talk about the American experience and the American experiment, it is an experiment, and it's not that old. So we are the ones who are the keeper of the flames. We are the glue in society that keeps the rest of us together. We don't do it because, and I've said this many times, I didn't raise my hand to support the Republican Party. And I didn't raise my hand to support the Democrat Party. I raised my hand to protect the Constitution of the United States. And that heritage goes back to 1775. That's who we owe our allegiance to, because the country doesn't have its bearing, its ballast, its stability without folks like you who have been there and have been willing to sacrifice, do one of those principles I'm talking about, self-service for the rest of the country. And you should be applauded for that. And it's great that we have that kind of dialogue here in Pueblo, and we try and preserve that here as well. Endurance. You have to be tough. You got to be able to stand. You got to be able to keep going when others are ready to give out. And that was true in the military. And I saw missions where you see people fatigued. And Drew, God bless you. You know what you saw, the endurance, that is a great book of yours. And what you did for those nurses is just unbelievable, what you did, but it was through endurance. I'm sure you guys were tired too and said, we'll get to them later, or we'll try it tomorrow, or whatever. You have to do it now. You have to have that endurance to make sure that it's something that lasts. I heard a phrase once that the brave are those that lasted 5 minutes longer. And there's a certain truth to that. When everybody else is willing to give out, you're willing to hang in there and get the job done. And so I always tried to make sure when we were in tough situations, and I was deployed to the Middle East, watched air operations in Operation Southern Watch. Now, nobody was shooting at me, and I wasn't shooting at them, but I saw us shooting at them, and I saw the hours we had to put in to make sure we accomplished the mission and brought all of our guys home safe. And the American way, that we did it right, that we made sure we conducted ourselves under the correct rules of international law. Synthesis is another one, or intellect, and that's taking everything I'm talking about and bringing it all together. We are a creative people. We are a creative service. We should make sure that we combine all of these things. You can't see them in silo or isolation. They all come together. And I tried to preach that every time I could. Even in my office as DA, I'd say, this is related to this, is related to this. And you have younger folks who are still learning, but they get it, and they understand if you point out how those things are done. You know, Troy Davenport was former Navy, was chief of police here, and after he retired, I thought he had been put out to pasture too early. And so I enticed him for about 6-8 months. I said, Troy, I need you back. And it's not because I needed an investigator in my office. What I wanted was somebody who held values, the values I'm talking about, and had stature, and did things the right way, and had the integrity to do it. And that office was better, not just because he's a good cop, but because of the way he did it. And that DA's office is better today. And when I left, I told him, you're not going anywhere. You stay here. They need senior leadership. And he's still there. He's kept the faith. Taking care of your subordinates. You need to take care of your subordinates. In any organization, you have to do that. You need a certain frankness in dealing with people and honesty, and that is taking care of them as well. You know, how many times have you folks in the positions you've been in had something put in front of you, a personnel issue, a subject matter issue, and you say, Jesus, why me? Can't you, just like Christ said that, can't you take this from me? Let somebody else do this. I don't want to do this. But you're there for a purpose, and you have to recognize that you're there for a reason, and you're put there to do it right. Could I be short-tempered sometimes and blow off steam? Yeah, I had a command staff, and they'd let me ping. And then after I pinged, I would take a deep breath, put my coat on, and we go out and we do it right, and we do it professionally. And I would look people in the eye and I'd say, you're not living up to standards. I told you when you came in here, this is what I expected of you. This is what I want you to do. And that's taking care of your subordinates and letting them know what expectations is, and in the terms of the military, making them a better officer and making them a better NCO or making them a better prosecutor. That's what you had to do to take a look at people and make sure that they did things better. I would take them, I would have programs when I was in the service on letters to parents. If their kid got promoted or got a special award or decoration, I had a letter to parents program where I would send the letter to the parents, say, look what Airman so-and-so is doing. How proud we are of what your son or daughter has done for this organization. The pride in that person, that binds that person to you, and the parents love it, and it made a greater appreciation for the military out there in the greater society, that somebody was appreciating what their son or daughter had done. I would take field trips when I was in D.C. Again, knowing your organization, we were close to all the Civil War battlefields. So I'd take them out to Chancellorsville, and I'd show them, we'd take a day off, we'd get an Air Force bus and we'd go down to Chancellorsville, or we'd go to the Wilderness, or we'd go to Fredericksburg. And we'd take those tours, and I would get a park ranger to instruct my folks on what that battle was all about. And the reason I bring up Chancellorsville is because it hadn't been that long before that General Schwarzkopf had basically used Lee's strategy at Chancellorsville to make that war, the first Persian Gulf War, a 100-hour war. And that was still fresh in everybody's mind at that time. They can't just be clerk typists. They just can't be lawyers. They have to know their organization. And I would do the same thing when I was DA. Early in COVID, when the courts were shut down, we could do various motions, but you couldn't do jury trials. And you were doing everything remotely. And our recruitment was down, and God bless them, it's still down. And it's true with the police and with the county sheriff today, but it's true with prosecutors. There's still 10 lawyers down to help keep you safe. But I thought there was going to be a morale issue on my hands, so we always had an end-of-the-month meeting. I started showing them Band of Brothers, that military connection, because I wanted them to see in hard times, leadership mattered, and two will take care of each other. and we'll get through this. And so once a month for 10 months, we watch an episode of Band of Brothers. And some of them, a couple, three, oh, I don't want to see this old war movie. But you know what? Most of them got it. And the ones that are still in that office today got it, and they understood what leadership was all about. The other issue that I used to talk about all the time, and I think this applies in civilian organizations as well, is to act like an officer or act like an NCO. I expect you to act like the rank that you have. If you're an E6, 7, or 8, I don't care what it is, you act like that sergeant. And if you're an 03 or 04, you better act like that officer. Because the rules that we enforce are not self-enforcing. So from a JAG point of view, if you're looking at disciplinary matters and trying to help out the commanders, we better talk like the rule book ourselves, because that rule book is not self-enforcing. Dare I say, the Constitution of the United States is not self-enforcing. There's nobody out there doing this unless people take care of the Constitution. And it only works if we still believe in ourselves. It only works if we still believe what Jefferson said and what Washington fought for, if we still believe that. I've often said, and I said it on Monday at the Memorial Day ceremony, when the GIs were storming Utah Beach and Omaha, I don't think they were thinking about the First Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or the Fourth Amendment. I think they had other things on their mind that day. But you know what? They were in effect doing that because we're different. We don't fight wars for treasure. We don't fight wars for conquest. You can look at European countries and all the fights of World War I, Franco-Prussian War, French and Indian War, the whole thing. That's all about conquest. We fought World War I as a war to end all wars. That's how idealistic we were. We fought that to preserve democracy. Franklin Roosevelt sent people into Europe. He had to persuade us to get into World War II, but we did that for the 4 freedoms that you all know about. Harry Truman had the guts to drop the atomic bomb, to preserve us and make sure that the democracy / the good guys win. Kennedy, Johnson, they all tried to do the same thing. Bush did that as well, in trying to make sure that you don't have territorial conquest come out. How easy would it have been in the summer of 1990 for President Bush to have said, you know, Saddam Hussein really fought our fight in the 80s. He took on Iran and for 8 wars bled his country for us, fighting the Iranian. So he wants Kuwait. What's Kuwait mean to us? We'll get the oil anyway. But Bush, a World War II product, said, no, this will not stand. You can't have one country just take over another one like that. Hence Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and Desert Storm. That's the America that we are. We are different. And we do stand up for the Constitution and all of the Bill of Rights. That's what makes you different. That's what made you different from your German counterpart in World War II. That's what made you different than Ho Chi Minh. That's what made us different than Saddam Hussein. There is a uniqueness in the American experience, and we should never forget that. And those of us who had fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers that fought in these wars, God bless them for fighting the good fight for all of us on their watch. Now it's our watch. So with all of these, if I've gone too long, just let me know. But I did want to kind of gravitate into something more personal. And I've been thinking about it. You know, I left office in January, so I got more time to think about me, not just the job. And I've been thinking about life and what it's about and how it blends in with these other values that we're talking about. Maybe it's just that time of life. Maybe I'm just sharing with you my conversation I've had with God here recently. And I tripped across General Stanley McChrystal. I don't know whether any of you have seen some of his comments in recent months. And he's kind of went through the same thing. And I really admire General McChrystal, and he's talked about character and who we are and who he is. You may recall General McChrystal was a 4-star who was head of Special Operations Command, and then later headed up Allied forces in Afghanistan. He later tendered his resignation because of an article that was put out, and I don't think it was entirely an accurate article. I think it may have said some things that were taken out of context. But I really admire him because he tendered his resignation. We could have had another Truman-MacArthur situation where Truman had to fire MacArthur, which really cost Truman the next election because MacArthur was a very popular general. But McChrystal saw the moral dilemma that he was in. And President Obama asked him to fly back to Washington. He wanted to talk to him. Before he met with the president, he tendered his resignation. And Obama was a bit taken back by that. He was not quite ready to do that. He saw that maybe that was the best way out of the situation. But what a man of honor and integrity to say, I may have run afoul here a bit. I don't want to embarrass this president, and more importantly, I don't want to embarrass this country. And so he resigned. And 4 days later, the president, as kind of a nod to him, gave him a very important post with regard to Veterans Affairs. But I've been reading a little bit about General McChrystal, and just a few observations that I think kind of apply to me and maybe to all of us in some sense. But one of his adages that he has is that we all have agency over ourselves. We make the choices, not situations, whatnot. We make those kind of choices. He says that character is not inherited, and it's not by education. It's developed from a succession of choices that reveal our inner capacity for virtue. That reveal our inner capacity for virtue. So when we come to that fork in the road, we can do right, not so right, whatever. That through experience and repetition, we kind of exercise that virtue muscle so that we do the right thing, and it becomes easier each time we do it. I'm kind of remember that poem by Robert Frost, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of the poem, and I'm paraphrasing, but it says essentially, I followed a path that diverged, and I took the harder one, and that has made all the difference. And how many times in your life when you've taken the harder path, it's actually done you good? You've been a better person because you tested yourself. A person's character is their fate, and a country's as well. And if you look back again on that, I think, proud history that we have, going back to Jefferson and Washington, and how Lincoln was willing to put the words of the Constitution into action to free a people. 600,000 deaths in that conflict, but it was the right thing to do, or else who were we as a people? I mentioned Wilson to preserve democracy. I remember all the other presidents as well, and I would include President Reagan, who helped bring down the Berlin Wall. He brought a 40-year conflict, a cold conflict, to an end because he stood up for American values. And you remember him there at the Berlin Wall. I was in Europe at the time when he made that speech. I wish I had a piece of the Berlin Wall. I tried to get one, but I'll get it sooner or later. But he stood there, and he was the inheritor of both Republican and Democrat administrations since the end of World War II, but he was the one who brought it down. And thank God he did on American terms. And same way with President Bush the first that I mentioned as far as Kuwait's concerned. Being somewhat of an amateur historian, some of you know me of that, there's a great quote by Robert E. Lee, who, as you know, for a 5-year period after the Civil War, he was the president of Washington College, what's known as Washington and Lee today. But he was asked essentially, do you have advice for anybody given the aftermath of the Civil War and people? 2-word response. He said, deny thyself. How do we deny ourselves in this culture? Everything's consumerism. Get as much as you can. Take it. Get all the toys. You've seen that. The one with the most toys wins. What about deny yourself? Every now and then, don't let your passions take over everything. Think who you are. Every now and then, step back, deny yourself, and you're a better person because of that. Humility is a great thing to have, and the United States has traditionally been known as a humble power. People know what we did in World War II. People know what we did in World War I. The folks in Vietnam know what we fought for. Korea still feels that heritage. We don't have to crow about it. People know what Jefferson wrote. They know what the Constitution is. They know who we are as a people and how we've been willing to sacrifice for it. Humility is a godly virtue, and we should all inherit that. Finally, from Thomas Paine, one of the authors from the American Revolution, reputation is what men think of us. Character is what angels know of us. It's sort of like that old phrase that you've heard, are you going to do right when nobody's looking? When it doesn't mean anything other than just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So, those are just some thoughts of where this old soldier is at this stage of his life and trying to make it all more meaningful, more authentic for all of us. It's our authentic self that matters and what we stand for and what we believe in. And that's what the CAV is about. And this is not just a obligatory compliment. What you have done here to help preserve this is great, not just for the city of Pueblo. It is great for the United States. And those virtues and the character you're talking about extend to every time and place, and they are eternal ones. Honesty and integrity. And we don't have enough of that today. And it's not unique to today. It's been around forever. But in every generation, on everybody's time, it's what do you stand for? Who will you stand for? Who will you stand next to when the chips are down? And that's what we've done. We've stood next to people when the chips were down. And we should always do that and not forget that great legacy that extends back to the American Revolution. I always talk about this chain of freedom that goes back to Concord and Lexington. And every generation has added another link through their time in the hole when they had to stand up and say what was right and do what was right. And every American generation has done that. And I think we would, if we were called on again, we would do it again. That's who we are as a people. Look at all the people that we had volunteer after 9/11. You know, we came forward with the colors at that time. So with that said, I just want to conclude by saying that character is what built this country. It's character that helps each one of us individually. And it's that character that hopefully will create the government that Abraham Lincoln talked about in the Gettysburg Address when he said, may this country always be one of the people and by the people and for the people. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you.
Navy veteran here, so I won't hold it against you being Air Force.
That's what I love about the service rivalry, you know?
Right.
But, you know, we in the Air Force take it worse all the time, so.
So I was hoping maybe you could share maybe somebody in your life and your career, professional and personal, that's maybe inspired you or mentored you to be the man who you are today.
Thank you. I'll give you two, just real quick. One on a personal level is my grandfather. He was a World War I veteran, ran a business college here in town for decades. And my dad died kind of suddenly when I was age 12. And this old guy came in and became my mentor, so to speak. He was a loving old grandfather. But here's a guy who had fought at St. Mihiel in September 1918, and he's trying to help raise a kid, listen to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan, you know. You talk about a cultural mismatch. But he taught me one thing, and I've tried to use it with my grandkids, which is just to hang on loosely. You know, love will conquer all if it's done right. And so here I am all these years later talking about him. Well, I'm sure he was kind of appalled by some of the stuff he saw that my generation was doing. But he held on to me, and he didn't let go. So that's one. The other one is, I meant to mention this story earlier, and this was one of my commandants at boot camp. And you all know demerits and how demerits are held against you. And basically, at least in the Air Force boot camp, they were designed to take time away from you, because we were told, you know, if you don't get demerits or you keep your demerits down, you might have Sunday afternoon off, or that, you know, that kind of thing. So I had a roommate, his name was Al, and he was from California, and he couldn't stand the idea that he would never get any time off for the weekend. And so he started not turning in all of his demerits. And as you know, there would be a tally sheet with what the first sergeant had put out and what you had received, and those both better equal. Well, they didn't. And so the commandant was going to kick Al out of officer training. And so there was 2 or 3 of us that said, well, you know, that's a little harsh, you know. So we went down to see the commandant. We said, look, we'll take Al aside. The 3 of us will take him, and we'll make sure he gets his demerits in, and we'll make sure that, you know, he lives up to standard. And the commandant told me one thing that has always stuck with me. He said, first of all, I really appreciate you gentlemen coming down here. He says, it's good of you to stand up for your roommate and your friend, and I commend you for that. He said, but in all my time of being in command, I found I could stop people from fighting. I can stop people from coming into the barracks late. I can stop them from being insubordinate. I can stop that. But he said, you know, I've never been able to stop somebody from being a liar. And he said, if I go through this, and we let him go through, what if he's at some missile silo in Wyoming or Montana, and he's down there by himself in the hole, and he decides, you know, just to take it easy and short circuit and not go through the checklist, or he's uploading a B-52 with nuclear weapons, and he doesn't fill out the checklist that way. He said, frankly, I'm not willing to take that chance because I've never been able to reform liars. And I've always taken that home to myself. I've always tried to make sure I told the truth. But that has always struck me in every organization, whether a military organization or a civilian one, is to find out who the truth tellers are and who aren't. Yes, sir. Thank you.
If anyone else has any questions, you can please raise your hand. And
we were talking earlier, just curiosity, what kept you in Colorado? You've traveled the world, you've been stationed in a lot of different locations, and you picked Pueblo. I'm just curious.
Well, as many people know here, my family goes back generations to Pueblo County. I had a great-grandfather who was a Union cavalry officer and was in a New York regiment during the Civil War, and he and a buddy came out here after the Civil War. So the family's been here since 1875. So I was gone for 25 years. I was gone from 1976 to 2001. And when Paula and I decided to get out, it was a joint decision because there was nothing wrong and they were offering me great jobs. I could have headed up, I could have worked for a 3-star, and I would have been at Travis Air Force Base north of San Francisco, and I would have been supervising 15 JAG functions throughout the Pacific. That sounded like a pretty good gig to me. But it was time to come home, and I've always had a political itch. I've always wanted to help my community. I love this town. I love it to death with all of its warts and blemishes, you know, and it has them. We all know. We're all family here, right? All of us Puebloans are family. We all kind of know each other. But I was just telling Dee, we had looked at taking a job in Tucson. I looked at the Denver-Boulder area, had some offers there. But I wanted to come home because I wanted to give that 150 years legacy to my 2 daughters. And if they didn't want it, that was fine. Nothing to be forced on them if they wanted to go elsewhere. And my oldest daughter's in Florida. But my younger daughter took me up on the offer. And she's a district court judge here in town. So I think that Chostner legacy here, and you know, this is our patch of dirt that God gave to us to make a stand. And I'm going to commend Danny DeRose back there because he could have gone anywhere else in this country and done well. And I bet he made a similar decision to me and said, you know, I love Pueblo, and I'm going to come back here because I want to make this community better. And so he's done it in his way and on a much, much smaller scale. I've done what I could because I love Pueblo, and I wanted to continue that family legacy, and so here we are.
We as a state and a city owe you a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have something in common. We're both Air War College alumnus.
And what a great experience that was to be able to do. What did you do your paper on?
Operations other than war.
I did on linebacker 1 and 2, which was the bombing campaign in Vietnam, the Christmas '72 bombing.
Yep.
Yeah.
They were interesting papers, no
For
doubt about it.
those of you who don't know, you have to finish War College, you have to write a thesis. And so what you pick, they suggest topics to you, but you can pick what you want.
My question to you is, if you're going to be prosecuted, would you rather be prosecuted under the UCMJ or the present court systems that we now have?
That's a great question. Are you looking for justice or are you looking for convictions? First of all, let me tell you one thing as DA, being from, I'm a proud Puebloan. And sometimes our friends to the north like to say we're not as safe a town as they are up in the Springs. That's nonsense. And the reason it is because they have a large military population with the Air Force and Army up there. If you have a GI get in trouble in Colorado Springs, they most likely will be handled under the UCMJ, and those statistics go on a different ledger than if you commit a civilian crime that is compiled by the FBI. So they will use FBI stats and say, look at this, we are a much safer town than Pueblo is. But they have excluded, you tell me, 20-25% of their crime off of there because it's being handled by the military. So don't let anybody tell you that they live in a safer town up in Colorado Springs. And I use this anecdotally. You want to go out to dinner on a Friday or Saturday night? You'd rather go down here on Union, or do you want to go up to Tejon in Nevada?
Gotcha.
Thank you. Now, to answer your question, they are similar systems. They're compatible in many ways, but they're not quite the same. So in terms of substantive law, they're very much the same because the federal court's crimes are the same as what you find under the UCMG, except for specifically military crimes, desertion, fear in the face of the enemy, insubordination, AWOL, desertion, those kind of things are included. But the murder charges, the rape, the burglary, larceny, all of that is the same in the military courts as in civilian courts. What's different is the process. And so if you were to go see a court-martial up in the Springs today, it would look very similar to what you would find in a federal district court up in Denver. However, your judge is not independent. Your judge is a military member themselves, although they are trained to be independent. The military really wants their military system to be impartial and as fair as it can be. You've heard that phrase that military justice is to justice what military music is to music. So they really want to go against that stereotype and make sure it's fair. The big difference, I think, is not in procedure and motions. I always thought, that the process in court-martials was very fair. The difference is in your jury. And in the civilian life, those of you who have served on here, you get your notice in the mail, you call in, you may or may not be called. Some people don't come to it at all, and the courts don't send, generally speaking, I hate to say this, but they don't send anybody out to get you for not showing up. That's not true in the military. And in the service, your panel are very well educated, because you will either have a panel that's entirely of officers or an officer and 1/3 enlisted, and your enlisted is usually an E7, 8, or 9. So in those cases, in the Air Force, and I'm sure it's true in the others, at least with your officer corps, you've got somebody who at least has a BA or BS, if not an advanced degree, and that's encouraged in all the services these days. And in your upper NCO echelon, they've all gone to college as well. So from a lawyer's perspective, to do some of the things, the theatrical things that you can get away with in civilian court ain't going to fly in a court-martial. They're too smart of a panel. And if lawyers will learn real quick, don't try that on a court-martial panel. They, if you're dealing with a 05, 6, and in some cases, depending on the defendant, a general officer, they don't care for those kind of theater antiques. So in terms of ultimate justice, you actually may, and getting to the root of what the problem is, you actually may have a better system in the UCMJ than I think you do in civilian courts. That's having practiced in both of them. And I did about 200 courts-martial, about 100 of them as a defense counsel and about 100 of them as a prosecutor. The Air Force at that time, and I think the other services have adopted this, they thought that you needed time as a defense counsel to be a better prosecutor, and you need time as a prosecutor to be a better defense counsel because you understood the pressures that each other's had. And so when you're talking about a case and trying to come to some resolution of it, you kind of put yourself in the other guy's shoes to come to something that's reasonable and reflects justice.
Sure.
Does that help a little bit?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Rhetorical question. 15 years ago, had you ever heard the term lawfare?
No. The first time I heard that was when our Secretary of Defense used that. And it is what it is. But I can tell you, though, that the JAGs that I worked with, and certainly my, especially as I became more senior and was deployed, was to keep my commander out of CNN. And you all remember from the Persian Gulf War and the baby milk factory that was bombed. There's huge consequences to those operators and the commanders, and I never wanted my commander to do that. And I'll give you another vignette there. When I was first deployed to Saudi Arabia for a 1-year continuous, Paul and I were separated for a year, and I sat in the command room with monitors, seeing everything that was going on, all our planes in the air, what we were doing, looking at Iraqi anti-aircraft guns, surface-to-air missiles, that sort of thing. And I was relatively new. It was my first 3 weeks there, and I was with General Renouart. Some of you may know Gene Renouart. He's retired 4-star. He went on to be commander at NORAD, Northcom. He was political military advisor to Secretary of Defense Gates. But when he was a 2-star, he had me. And we were sitting in the war room watching an operation, and we had a satellite come over a house and looked like a Mexican hacienda, interior courtyard, 2-story, and much of the architecture in the Middle East actually looks like New Mexico and northern Mexico. And there was a surface-to-air missile sitting there right next to the buildings. And it's a legitimate target. You can't put missiles next to churches or mosques or anything. That's a legitimate target. But is it a wise target? And so we had planes coming in. We had 2 F-15s coming in ready to deliver munitions, and General Renouart had not given the signal to release missiles. And we're sitting there about a minute and a half out, and I sat right behind him. He said, "Jag?" I said, "No, sir, I don't know what that is." I said, "I don't know what that house is." All the captains, they wanted to go. They want to see things explode and break things, and that's what we do in the Air Force. And I'm the only guy in the room with about as many people this saying, "I don't think so, sir, not yet." Got closer and closer, and he was getting tight-jawed. I'm the guy holding the train up, But he said one last time, "What do you think, Chostner?" I said, "No, sir, I don't know what that is." And praise be to God, it wasn't 10 seconds later, a lady, 2 kids, and dogs come out. It was a daycare center. And the general just went like this, and the planes went like that. But if they'd hit that, now I don't know whether it made CNN or not, but within the military they would have known that. And he didn't want to be seen as a guy who was too quick on the trigger. And from that time on, he trusted me. And so, over there we were dealing with The Hague, we were dealing with Geneva Convention, but we had NATO troops there, so we were dealing with NATO. The French flew with us, so did the British and the Saudis. So you had host nation, as well as, like I say, domestic U.S. law. And, would it have felt good to hit that thing? Yeah. It would have been great to take that missile out. But we flew above those missiles anyway. They weren't going to hit us. So I think, the general understood that, and he and I are still in contact to this day. And I think, to a certain extent, it's that integrity And I'm not, you know, I told him the truth as I saw it, and it worked out. So, anything else? Thank you.
I got to say one thing, because over the last few years, I think we've been on about a dozen or more podiums together doing things, like the Huntley-Brinkley thing. But and so if I didn't, then we'd missed the opportunity to make it number 13, I guess. But appreciate your explanation of the ingredients to leadership. For those that haven't been in the military, or especially the younger ones here that may not go in the military or go into a different profession or occupation, the principles are the same. The honor and the integrity, take care of your troops, the people under you, they're all the same, and you can never go wrong with that. So thank you for explaining that so well.
Thank you so much, Drew.